My love for you could never be measured. You're my teacher. Each day.
911, what's the address of the emergency? Can I have somebody at 6841 Mayo Boulevard? Ma'am, he just took my whole phone, ma'am. Okay, listen, what is your relationship to him? Who is he? That was my boyfriend. He was going crazy. Please, get somebody here. My name is Asia. I've been called y'all. Don't ask me my name. Y'all got my number.
On the morning of May 11th, 2023, the calmness of an ordinary day in New Orleans was shattered. Asia Davis, a 28-year-old mother, sent her daughter off to school as she always did, thinking it would be just another day in her life. But moments after that, tragedy struck, and Asia's world and that of her daughter would be forever changed. A chilling 911 call, desperate and filled with fear, revealed the true horror unfolding that morning. Asia's frantic voice filled the air as she begged for help, warning that her life was in danger.
But nobody never came yet. Please, get somebody here. Ma'am, is somebody coming soon? I have been reported this 2 hours ago.
But what was the true extent of the nightmare she was living? The man who was once supposed to love and protect her, who was serving life in prison, had just escaped and was about to kill her in cold blood. This man was Henry Talley Jr., her boyfriend, a man with a violent past and a disturbing history. Despite Asia's earlier warnings and calls to the police, Henry's violent tendencies would escalate on that fateful day. Before we jump into the devastating facts, let's rewind and understand how everything came to be. Asia Davis was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana. A 28-year-old mother, she had a daughter named Miles Davis, who was only 5 years old at the time of her death. Asia was known to her friends and family as a vibrant, funny, and caring woman who could bring life into any room. She had a natural gift for humor, often lifting spirits even in difficult times. Those closest to her say she had a way of making people laugh and always found a way to brighten others' days, no matter how heavy her own burdens might have been.
She'll make you mad, but then a couple of minutes later, you couldn't do nothing but laugh at her because she was she just was a comedian in her own right.
But Asia was more than just a source of joy for those around her. She had a deep passion for helping others, which led her to pursue a career in healthcare. As a certified nursing assistant, she dedicated herself to caring for the elderly, a job that required both compassion and commitment. Her colleagues admired her work ethic, noting how she always went above and beyond in her role, making a real difference in the lives of her patients. For Asia, her work wasn't just a job. It was a calling. Above all, Asia was a devoted mother. Her daughter, Miles, was the center of her world. Aisha did everything in her power to provide a stable and loving environment for Miles, whether it was helping with homework, playing in the yard, or simply being there when Miles needed her. Aisha made sure that her daughter was always her priority. Neighbors often remarked on how close and loving their relationship was. But in addition to her devotion as a mother, Aisha was also a woman of faith. She attended church regularly, finding peace and strength in her spiritual community. Aisha was an active member of her church and often helped with community events. She was known for her kindness and willingness to lend a helping hand whenever someone needed it. Despite her light-hearted and compassionate nature, Aisha's life took a tragic turn when she became involved with Henry Talley Jr., a man whose dark past would eventually take her life. Henry Talley Jr. was 44 years old when he entered Aisha's life. Henry's criminal history stretched back to 1996, when he was involved in a drive-by shooting that killed a 12-year-old boy. Though he was the driver and not the shooter, he was convicted of the crime and sentenced to life in prison. However, his life sentence was reconsidered due to a controversial ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court, which decided that juveniles convicted of crimes should be given the chance for a sentence review based on recent developments in juvenile brain science. In 2021, after serving 25 years, Henry was released from prison after pleading guilty to manslaughter and attempted murder. Despite his release, his violent tendencies remained, and his past would soon resurface. It was during his probation that Henry met Aisha. Though his violent history and his time in prison cast a shadow over their relationship, Aisha believed that Henry had turned a corner. On the surface, it appeared that Henry was in control of his life. He was attending anger management and personal development classes. But as time went on, it became clear that Henry's violent tendencies had not changed. Even Aisha's family had reservations about Henry from the start. They noticed the early signs of abuse, controlling behavior, jealousy, and emotional manipulation, but Aisha kept her struggles hidden. She believed, as many victims of abuse do, that she could somehow fix the relationship. Unfortunately, as time passed, Henry's behavior grew more erratic and violent. On May 11, 2023, Aisha went through her normal routine. She woke up, got her daughter ready for school, and sent her off with a kiss, never realizing that it would be the last time she would see her daughter alive. Henry Talley Jr., her abusive boyfriend, had other plans. Earlier in the morning, Aisha was seen arguing with Henry outside an apartment complex. Witnesses reported that Aisha was trying to end the relationship, but Henry accused her of infidelity. Aisha was heard pleading with him, asking if he was really going to do this to her. Moments later, gunshots rang out. Aisha fell to the ground, fatally wounded by the man she once loved. But the horror didn't stop there. After shooting her, Henry ran over her body twice with his gold SUV, ensuring that she would not survive. Witnesses were horrified by the brutality of the attack as Henry fled the scene. Aisha's life had been taken in the most violent and senseless way imaginable. The chilling reality of Aisha Davis's murder did not just lie in her brutal death, but also in the systemic failures that allowed the tragedy to escalate. Just days before her death, Aisha had already sought help from law enforcement. On April 6, 2023, Aisha had called 911, fearful for her safety. In a panicked tone, she reported that her boyfriend, Henry Talley Jr., had taken her phone and was behaving erratically. He was going crazy, she had said.
911, what's the address of the emergency? Can I have somebody at 6841 Mayo Boulevard? Ma'am, he just took my whole phone, ma'am. Okay, listen, what is your relationship to him? Who is he? That was my boyfriend. He was going crazy. Please, get somebody here. Was y'all fighting or anything? I didn't touch him, he hit me.
Unfortunately, the police response was delayed, and by the time officers arrived, Henry had already fled the scene. This delay in intervention wasn't a one-off occurrence. Aisha had made another distress call just days before the fatal attack, once again reaching out for help.
But nobody never came yet. My name is Asia. I've been called y'all. Don't ask me my name. Y'all got my number. Ma'am, is somebody coming soon? I had been reported this 2 hours ago.
She had been trying to escape Henry's violent behavior, but despite her urgent calls, the police took 12 hours to respond, marking both calls as gone on arrival, indicating that by the time officers arrived, the suspect was no longer at the scene. For Aisha, the lack of urgency in responding to domestic violence calls would prove to be a fatal mistake. The lack of urgency in responding to domestic violence calls would become one of the major points of contention in the aftermath of Aisha's death.
Well, 12 hours, that's how long dispatch records show it took New Orleans police to respond to a woman who was calling for help from a man allegedly abusing her. Good evening, everyone. I'm Cherise Gibson.
And I'm Devin Bartolotta. Aisha Davis was eventually killed by that man, investigators say. And now the city council wants to know why police took so long to get to her. Eleanor Tabone has the story.
Aisha Davis is one of 6 women killed in New Orleans in the span of a month. According to dispatch records, the young mother called for help, but seemingly authorities failed her.
This woman reached out twice to the New Orleans Police Department through 911 and made complaints fearing for her life.
Kenya Davis is still grieving the loss of her 28-year-old daughter, Aisha Davis.
She was my child. She was my daughter.
She was apparently killed by her boyfriend, Henry Talley Jr. Our partners at NOLA.com say he shot her, then ran over her.
We barely holding on.
Twice before her death, she called 911 for help, but dispatch records show on both April 6th and April 18th, her calls were downgraded. In both occasions, it took NOPD 12 hours to respond, and both calls were marked gone on arrival. NOPD says those calls were downgraded because the suspect had left the scene and there was no threat of imminent danger. Council President JP Morrell wants to know why a domestic violence complaint is not a priority.
It is hard for us as a city to have victims and survivors take us seriously when we don't prioritize their safety by thinking a 12-hour response on 2 complaints of domestic violence is acceptable.
Just what we see in this case regarding Miss Davis. Well, she's dead now. She's dead.
Domestic violence advocate Kim Sport says there's no excuse for why it took officers that long to get to Asia.
There's a reason why we have laws that distinguish simple battery from domestic abuse battery, and that's because of the threat of imminent harm to a victim of domestic abuse.
Family members, community leaders, and even local lawmakers were horrified by the lack of intervention. Aisha's family voiced their frustration with the police response time, asking how a woman who had already asked for help could be left vulnerable, especially with a violent offender like Henry on the loose. This delay in intervention marked the beginning of a larger conversation about how domestic violence cases are treated by law enforcement in New Orleans and across the country. Many wondered if Aisha's death could have been avoided if authorities had responded more swiftly to her calls for help. After Aisha's tragic death, the New Orleans Police Department launched a thorough investigation into her murder. The initial investigation revealed the gruesome details of Aisha's death. She had been shot multiple times by Henry Talley Jr. during an argument outside an apartment complex. Witnesses reported hearing Aisha plead with Henry moments before the shots rang out. Her murder wasn't quick. It was a deliberate, cold act, a culmination of months of escalating abuse. But what happened next was even more horrifying. After shooting Aisha, Henry didn't simply flee the scene. He made sure that she was dead by running over her body twice with his gold SUV, an act that turned the murder into an act of extreme cruelty and finality. Following Aisha's death, authorities worked quickly to gather evidence and speak to witnesses. It was clear that the murder was not a random act.
As it relates to the violent incidents in the past, I would say 24 hours in the city relative to women, what I will say is none of these acts are random at all. And what we have to understand that women also play a role in violent activity in our city. And so they will remain under active investigation.
The argument that led to the shooting was not the first time Henry had become violent with Aisha. Her family told authorities that they had warned her about the toxic relationship, but Aisha had hoped things would get better. Now, she was gone. And the evidence began to paint a heartbreaking picture of a woman who had been trapped in a cycle of abuse, unable to escape her tormentor in time. Investigators pieced together statements from neighbors, as well as security footage from the area. It became clear that Henry had been a danger to Aisha for months. In fact, he had even made threats against her life prior to the murder, leaving a trail of warning signs that no one had been able to act on fast enough. The days following Aisha's murder were filled with tension and uncertainty as authorities hunted for Henry Talley Jr. Henry had fled the scene after committing the murder, and the NOPD initiated a massive search to locate him. Despite his violent history and the evidence pointing to him as the primary suspect, Henry managed to evade capture for 6 days. During this time, Aisha's family and the public held their breath, waiting for justice to catch up with him. On May 17, 2023, Henry was finally apprehended. He was located and taken into custody on the 2600 block of Governor Nichols Street in New Orleans. The arrest was made after a coordinated effort between local law enforcement and federal agencies. At the time of his arrest, Henry was facing several serious charges, including first-degree murder, stalking, and parole violations. The news of his arrest brought a sense of relief to the community, but it did not come without frustration.
Henry Talley Jr. has been arrested and is now facing a second-degree charge. NOPD says when it responded 12 hours later to Asia's calls, they tried to call her and knocked on the door but didn't get a response, so they marked their call gone on arrival.
The fact that it had taken 6 days to apprehend a man with such a violent past left many questioning the effectiveness of law enforcement's response. Why had it taken so long for Henry to be captured, especially considering the clear danger he posed to those around him? At the time of his arrest, Henry was booked into New Orleans Justice Center with his bond set at $750,000. He would remain in custody awaiting trial for the murder of Asia Davis. The arrest marked the beginning of what would be a long legal process, and many in the community began to ask what justice for Asia would truly look like. Would Henry be held accountable for his violent past? Would he face the full consequences of his actions? Initially, Henry was booked on second-degree murder.
A man accused of his ex-girlfriend in New Orleans is set to appear in court today. Henry Talley Jr. is facing multiple charges, including first-degree murder and stalking for allegedly killing Asia Davis back in May. Investigators say Talley forced her into his vehicle and then drove over her body as he got away. Prior to that, Davis called police twice to report Talley had threatened her. He pleaded not guilty to the charges.
His charges were later upgraded when a grand jury indicted him on first-degree murder in September 2023. The indictment also included charges of felon in possession of a firearm, obstruction of justice, and stalking. Prosecutors emphasized the brutality of the crime and the repeated threats Asia had reported to police in the weeks leading up to her death.
911, what's the address of the emergency? Can I have somebody at 6841 Mayo Boulevard?
On April 6th, Asia Davis called 911.
Ma'am, he just took my whole phone, ma'am. Okay, listen, what is your relationship to him? Who is he? That was my boyfriend. He was going crazy. Please, get somebody here. Was y'all fighting or anything? I didn't touch him. He hit me.
Our partners at NOLA.com shared with us the dispatch records. Asia called 911 at 6:12 p.m. on the 6th. Asia called 911 back several times.
Boy, nobody never came yet.
The lack of response angering the young woman.
My name is Asia. I've been called y'all. Don't ask me my name. Y'all got my number.
A woman in need of help.
Ma'am, is somebody coming soon? I have been reported this 2 hours ago.
NOPD didn't arrive till 5 a.m. the next day.
But at his arraignment, Henry Talley would enter a plea to the charges. The state announced it would not pursue the death penalty, meaning the maximum punishment he faces is life imprisonment without parole if convicted. As of when this story was uploaded, Henry remains incarcerated without bond. The case is still in the pre-trial stage, with defense attorneys preparing challenges and prosecutors building their case. No trial date has yet been set, but hearings continue to draw close attention from Aisha's family, who have vowed to attend every session. In the aftermath of Aisha's death, the outpouring of grief from her family, friends, and the community was overwhelming.
The family is coming to terms with the loss of a young woman who was brutally snatched away from them. Good evening and thanks for watching. I'm Devin Bartolotta.
And I'm Sharice Gibson. As Asia Davis was shot and killed this week, Eleanor Tabone sat down with her family in tonight's top story.
This memorial paying tribute to 28-year-old Asia Davis, who was shot and killed at the intersection of Mayo Boulevard and the South I-10 service road. Her family now grieving the loss of a young mother, daughter, sister, cousin, niece, and best friend.
Her family, devastated by the loss of a vibrant and loving woman, struggled to come to terms with what had happened. Aisha's mother, in particular, voiced her heartbreak at the systemic failure that had allowed her daughter to be killed. The anger was palpable, with many asking why Aisha's earlier calls for help had been ignored and why it had taken so long for the police to respond. The community in New Orleans, where Aisha had lived, also felt the loss deeply. Neighbors who had known Aisha for years described her as a warm, kind-hearted woman who always went out of her way to make others smile.
She'll make you mad, but then a couple of minutes later, you couldn't do nothing but laugh at her because she was she just was a comedian in her own right.
Her co-workers in the healthcare field remembered her as someone who had dedicated herself to helping others, always willing to go above and beyond for her patients. In the wake of Aisha's death, many people began to voice their concerns about domestic violence, especially the failure of the justice system to respond promptly to victims in need.
You call the police over and over and over, the police never come. So it tears me up a lot of days.
Activists and community leaders in New Orleans used Aisha's story as a platform to raise awareness about the dangers of domestic abuse and the importance of better law enforcement responses to such cases.
Unfortunately, people are involved in criminal activity in our city, and it plays out on the streets of New Orleans, and it is all genders, right?
Aisha's tragic death became a rallying cry for change, and her family began to speak out, calling for more action to be taken to protect women like Aisha from violent partners.
Nobody knows how they feel except for those mothers. And when you got people like Henry Talley that did what he did to Aisha, I mean, how are you supposed to feel? You want the justice system, you want to let them do their work, but you also, people have to understand that the victim's family is suffering.
Aisha Davis's funeral was a heartbreaking moment for her family and the community. Hundreds of people gathered to say their final goodbyes to the woman who had touched so many lives with her warmth, humor, and compassion. The service was filled with tears, but also with the stories of the impact she had made in the lives of those around her. Her daughter, Miles, was too young to fully comprehend the gravity of her mother's death, but she would grow up knowing the love and dedication that Aisha had given her throughout her short life. During the funeral, Aisha's family reflected on her many qualities, the way she always made sure her daughter was cared for, her devotion to her work in healthcare, and her active involvement in her church community. She was remembered not just as a victim, but as a woman who had worked hard to build a future for herself and her daughter, a woman who loved deeply and who had been taken far too soon. Aisha's story, though heartbreaking, raises several important questions and lessons about how we as a society can prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future. Why were Aisha's calls for help not taken more seriously? What needs to change in the criminal justice system to prevent individuals with a violent past, like Henry Talley Jr., from being released without adequate supervision or support? Aisha Davis's tragic death is a call for all of us to take action. We must ensure that our legal and law enforcement systems prioritize the safety of victims and that no more lives are lost to violence that could have been prevented.
In this state of Louisiana, there is a 1-to-1 ratio that if you are a victim of domestic violence and they do not get to you and they do not intervene, you go from being a survivor to a deceased victim.
Some New Orleans City Council members question whether a mother's death could have been prevented if police had responded faster to her calls for help. Good evening, I'm Lee Zurich.
And I'm Meg Gatto. Council members vow to get to the bottom of a series of events leading up to Aisha Davis's killing in New Orleans East.
As Rob Masson reports, council members are concerned about slow police response times, which may have resulted in a parolee now accused of murder to go free.
It's been 2 weeks since 28-year-old Aisha Davis, a mother and nurse's assistant, was found shot to death on Mayo Boulevard. City council members want answers. Council members say that Davis attempted to report alleged abuse at the hands of 44-year-old Henry Talley Jr., but it took police 12 hours to respond.
You had 2 complaints from a victim, I guess a deceased, so not a survivor anymore, of domestic violence. And these were complaints that were downgraded, which is why they had 12-hour responses.
Talley, who had been convicted of murder in the 1996 killing of a 12-year-old boy and sentenced to life in prison, was allowed to go free 2 years ago after serving 25 years, thanks to a Supreme Court decision on life sentences given to juveniles.
The cops are running from call to call to call and are paddling upstream without a paddle the entire time.
New Orleans council members are also concerned that Orleans judges don't seem to be holding Gwen's Law hearings at the same rate of neighboring parishes. Those hearings are designed to make it harder for domestic abusers to bond out of jail.
Is that in Jefferson Parish, they roughly hold 150 Gwen's Law hearings every month. That's on average. On a high number, it's about 180, 150. Here in Orleans Parish, we hold about 15 a month.
Police Association attorney and former police officer Eric Hessler says domestic violence complaints were a higher priority back when the department had more officers.
Normally your rank would call you and call his units that were out on the scene and ask them to either wrap that scene up and go handle the code 2, or order them to do so.
Council members say it's all part of a problem that's feeding an environment where domestic abusers aren't being adequately punished, fueling violence against women, which can often turn deadly.
It is hard for us as a city to have victims and survivors take us seriously. We don't prioritize their safety by thinking a 12-hour response on 2 complaints of domestic violence is acceptable.
If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out to local authorities or organizations like the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Your safety matters, and help is available. As we remember Asia, let us honor her legacy by taking action, by demanding better responses from law enforcement, by supporting those in abusive relationships, and by working together to prevent future tragedies. What do you think about it? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this story intriguing, please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.